Good evening. Welcome to the Nantucket Whaling Museum. I'm Michael Harrison. I'm the Chief Curator and Obed Macy Research Chair at the Nantucket Historical Association. We're delighted that you've all turned out this evening for our special program. So as many of you probably know, our special exhibition this summer here at the Whaling Museum is about the history of summer on Nantucket, and some ideas about that as something that's been developing here for more than 150 years. And so we wanted to do a program that looked at certain aspects of summer, maybe perhaps pulled back the curtain a little bit on how you make the magic that, makes for fun and happy experiences for the people who come here. And I'm delighted to have a fantastic panel of people with insights into different aspects of summer on the island. Each of them have different connections to the island and have come here for different reasons and take part in different aspects of the broader story. So I will introduce each of the panelists in turn, and then I'm going to ask them to tell a little bit of their own story about how they arrived on Nantucket and what it is that they do that's brought them to be part of the panel tonight. Before we get started, I just did want to make a quick historical comment. I act as the historian for the NHA, so I can't get away without saying at least something historical. We call this kind of a program a GAM, and that's a very whaling term. When in the 19th century whaling ships would encounter each other in the vast Pacific, they would often come together and then socialize. They would gather on one ship or the other, and they would share stories and music and other types of social activity, and they would call this a GAM. They would have a GAM. And on Nantucket, that word became current for a social gathering. So you'd have your friends over for a GAM. And in whaling circles, the word for a group of whales, one of the three words for a group of whales, is also GAM. And I neglected to look up before I came tonight whether the origin starts with calling a group of whales a GAM and then calling a group of whalers a GAM, or the other way around. But anyway, I'm delighted to bring you all here to our GAM this evening, where we're going to talk about summer and recreation and aspects of that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce first Emily Aswad, who is with Nantucket Community Sailing. And Emily, would you tell us just very briefly, how did you come to be on Nantucket, and sort of what's the scope of your role at NCS?
Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be here. My name is Emily Aswad. I'm the Assistant Program Director at Nantucket Community Sailing. This is my 7th summer on Nantucket and with Community Sailing. I grew up in Scituate, Massachusetts on the South Shore, and I grew up sailing there. Started racing competitively and raced in college as well, and have been teaching sailing since I was 15 years old, and at a variety of organizations, both community organizations and private yacht clubs. So sailing has always been a passion of mine, and my early days as an instructor led me to become a teacher. So during the off season, I'm a teacher in Vermont currently, and so I came to Nantucket because my husband had worked out here for 3 summers before we met. And right around the time we met, he said, how about we go out to Nantucket for a few summers again? And I said, not a bad idea. So we came out here, and I am now the Assistant Program Director, jumped right into that role. And the best part is that I get to bring my knowledge of curriculum development, inclusion. I've specialized in special education and intervention in my role in teaching, so bringing inclusion to community sailing and being a part of this great community is fantastic. So part of my role with the organization is managing 30 instructors. We're a decentralized organization, so we have sites at Pulpus and jetties, and we work with Nantucket Yacht Club as well as at their facility. And we send out sailor evaluations, so I develop those and send those out, curriculum planning, program planning, designing the orientation, running that for our instructors, doing our rentals, private lesson, managing our fleet. So there's a lot that happens in the 8 weeks of summer.
Do you get it? I'm sorry, we're going to go into Harvey in just a second. Do you get a chance to stay after the summer for very long?
I do not, because of my role as a teacher. So I do. I'm here for 9.5 weeks and then jump off island. But I still stay connected, and I work for the organization year round remotely.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. So our next contestant, I'm happy to introduce Harvey Young from Young's Bicycle Shop. Harvey, tell us how you got to be on Nantucket and what you do with the bicycle shop.
Thanks, Michael. I'll take door number 2, please. I was born and raised on Nantucket in the Nantucket Cottage Hospital when it was on Westchester Street. So my parents moved out here. My father came out here when he was 5 years old with my grandparents. My mom was a visitor, and they got married and lived here in the island. So my family, all my siblings I grew up here in Nantucket. And I grew up as a Young, which means Young's Bicycle Shop. And so as soon as I was old enough to work, I was down there working at the bicycle shop with my 3 sisters, my 2 brothers, my dad, my grandfather, and that was the beginning of my life. I left Nantucket in 1978 as a bit of a disgruntled teenager whose small town had gone to hell in a handbasket. Back in the 70s, this place was ruined. It wasn't like it used to be. Size Green Coffee Pot turned into a fern bar where they were selling quiche, and some other place went out of business. They were building houses on the top of every hill in the moors, and you could see it from across the island because there wasn't any scrub oak blocking the view, and I needed to get out and see the world. I was influenced by the travelers that came from all around the world to see Nantucket, and I was influenced by the Whaling Museum and the romance of going out into the world, and I had a lot of influence from Jack London and John Steinbeck. I ended up in the Pacific Northwest, where I got to be a working man and do all kinds of cool stuff. Eventually, I met my wife Ellen, who's here tonight. We started our family together, and in the early 90s, we had a chance to come back to Nantucket, and with no intention of working in Young's Bicycle Shop. I was either going to be a landscaper with my sister, or I was going to work at the lumber yard because I knew about lumber. And the opportunity came up. My brother Robert hired me to be the manager of Young's Bicycle Shop in 1993. And so I did that for 30 years. And I'm recently retired, and our son Jasper is now the owner, operator, manager of Young's Bicycle Shop.
That's fantastic. Next, we have Sheila Lucy, who is the Harbor Master for Nantucket.
Hi, my name's Sheila Lucy. I'm the Nantucket Harbor Master. I came to Nantucket in 2002. I was in the Coast Guard for 25 years before I retired and became the Harbor Master. So my last assignment was as the officer in charge of Coast Guard Station Brant Point. And I loved it out here, and so I ended up staying. And a job opportunity came up with the town in the Harbor Master's office. So I jumped on it and was able to stay, and I've been here ever since. I've been the Harbor Master since 2012. I'm pretty much in charge of the water safety for the island locally. We take care of inshore search and rescue, oil pollution response, the pump out program, aids to navigation. Also, I'm the director of the Nantucket Lifeguard program. We have 60 lifeguards that come every summer. We lifeguard 10 beaches, and they perform. Last year we guarded over 400,000 people with no major incidents or events. We get started in the beginning of July. Right now they're here we go from a staff of 4 to 84 in a weekend. And so it's kind of interesting. They're most of them between the ages of 16 and 22. So it keeps us jumping. But they're good at what they do, and when they're on the beach, they're amazing. It's the after hours that gets a little interesting. But we put them up in housing, but our program is nationally certified by the United States Life Saving Association, and we are the only small seasonal community to hold that certification, which speaks volumes to what these guys are doing and how hard we're working to give you guys the best protection we can when you're in the water and on the water. We have 20 that work on the dock, 60 that work on the beach, and as I said, we're on 10 beaches, and we also have 6 ATVs that are roving the unguarded beaches just in case incident should happen there.
That's incredible. I've got all kinds of questions to come back to. So next, Jimbologna, who is connected to both a number of the golf clubs here on island, particularly at Sankaty, and also is very active with the White Heron Theater Company. And I think I'd love to hear, how did you arrive on Nantucket, and how many rounds of golf do you play every year?
Sometimes in a courtroom, you refuse to answer a question because it might incriminate you with your spouse. But she knows the count. It's over 300 a year. My next question, would you please, this is just purely for my own interest. Have you heard about the White Heron Theater, and do you know where it is? That's good. Please come see Blythe Spirit. We open on July 10th. I played my first round of golf in Bloomington, Illinois in the summer of 1958. I think I was 11. A few years later, for good and sufficient reason, my parents sent me to a boarding school, a Jesuit boarding school in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, right at the confluence of the Wisconsin and Mississippi rivers. It had a sand green golf course. If there was any doubt about me going away to high school, that golf course sort of put it over the edge. I was lucky enough to go from there to Boston College and to the University of Virginia School of Law, where I still teach part-time. In between, I clerked for a judge and then was with the Justice Department for 7.5 years, and then in private practice. I met my wife, the wonderful Alice Reno, now Malone, in early 1974. She was trying out for Pajama Game as a singer, dancer at the Little Theater of Alexandria, Virginia. Use your imagination. What would you wear if you were trying out to sing and dance? I was helping to cast the show and was very interested in this particular dancer. We spoke a couple of days later. She was called back and got a good part. And we were married by the end of 1974. About 2.5 years later, Alice decided that she needed to take me to her island. And so we came to Nantucket in August of 1977. And ever devoted to me, she found that there was a golf tournament the next day at Maya Comet. And she encouraged me to go out there. And so I did. And I met a lot of wonderful Nantucket people. And I won low gross. And I played with this wonderful gentleman by the name of Dick Caton, who was a fireman here on the island. And he won low net. And his prize was a $200 gift certificate to John Lochtefeld's gallery. And my prize was a $200 gift certificate to a dentist here on the island. Dick had 5 children. And I looked at him and I said, "Do you want to trade?" And he said, "I thought you would never ask." And we became friends for life. Dick and his wife would come down from Caton Circle and sit on one of the benches or sit in their car on Main Street, and we would always find them and check from year to year on what had changed in our lives. We kept coming back to Nantucket from 77. In 79, we went to England and Scotland, but that's the only year since 77 that we have not been here on the island. I was lucky enough to join Sankaty in 1982 and Nantucket Golf Club when it opened in 1998. I won a club championship the first year at Nantucket Golf Club, but it took me 25 years to win one at Sankaty. About 10 years before that championship, I had known Paul Judy, who had early on started doing a history of Sankaty, golf on Nantucket, and what I'm going to talk about might not be possible without Paul's original research. So how did golf begin on Nantucket? Understand that at one time or another, there have been 5 18-hole golf courses on Nantucket. We think of a lot of them as 9-hole golf courses, a couple of them as 9-hole golf courses, and one only exists as a conservation area anymore. But if you go back to the summer of 1897, one Sidney Chase, an investment banker in Boston, uttered to his friend that I won't go any place on vacation unless there's a golf course. What a wonderful man. What a wonderful statement.
Jim, can I butt in here just a little bit? Because I love that sentiment that people who come here have certain interests, and they might have certain interests in the outside world, and they might be interested in coming here because it's beautiful beaches and whatnot. But this idea that like, oh, well, why would I ever go to Nantucket? There's no golf course. And so they built one for him. And I know there's a very long history that we want to get into in a minute, but I'm wondering if I could just open it up a little bit for everybody, because everybody here is sort of on that line between the people who live here and the people who come here, the people who are on vacation and the people who are distinctly not on vacation during the summer. And I think within everybody's experience here, the island is changing and has changed. And I'd love to get a little bit of impressions sort of on that. Things that people have said sort of, Sheila, you hire an immense number of people. And Harvey, I think you hire a fair number of people as well. And has that become more difficult? Who are you hiring? Harvey, I think you had said at one point about you used to hire, sort of the local high school kids or the local college kids here in the summer, and then that sort of changed over time. I'm wondering if the two of you might make a few comments just about how that picture is changing for you. Yeah, Sheila, please.
Yes, even since I took over as the harbor master and the director of the lifeguard program, we've added 4 beaches now. We only used to have 6. There was about 35 lifeguards. We've added the ATVs. We do whatever we have to, and it's just because of the need. There's in the summer on a given weekend day, there's up to 7,000 people on one beach alone. So like at Nobodere, we have 6 lifeguards. And what we've been doing is because I'm prior military, so I reach out to the colleges, to the ROTC programs, to the Division I swim teams and Division I teams in general, because like athletes are, want to maintain that good physical condition, and we have them working out every day, and it's rigorous. So the ROTC has paid off really well for us. I know on the Cape they're having a big crisis, and nationally they're having a big crisis as far as lifeguards go. There's Cape towns that can't open their beaches because they don't have enough lifeguards, but it's because of you guys in the town that they understand how important the lifeguards are. We pay them well, and we take care of them, and I think having the nationally certified program attracts those, aggressive, I want to get after it, I want to be part of the best. So we had 120 applicants for 60 positions.
Wow. Where do you house everybody?
That's tricky, but
You don't have to answer the question.
we have,
Please do.
I don't want anybody to steal our ideas, but I usually can talk the land bank into not tearing down a property until after the summer, and I put them in the house that's getting ready to get torn down. So we borrowed 2 houses from the land bank this year. We do have a house out by the airport that I put 14 guys in. We have a house on Washington Street and one on Washington Street Extension. We also borrow from Mariah Mitchell.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Harvey, what's it been like for you over the years with getting summer help?
Could I first ask Sheila a question about the staff that are in the house that's going to be torn down? Do they know that's coming at the end of the season?
No, I tell them it's a prize. They're lucky.
Thank you. You asked about what it's like for us getting staff. I mean, it's evolved over the years, and I mean, when I was young, it was our family and a few college kids and a few locals. And over the years, it's changed a lot. It used to be, the college season was a lot different in the 70s and the 80s, and I think colleges would start in September, and now they start on the 20th of August or something like that. And even in the 90s, when I took over and I was running the place, I think you could get a college kid, and of course it was like, can you stay until Labor Day? And they would say, yeah, I can stay until Labor Day. And it's like, well, I'm going to pay you this much an hour, and if you work until Labor Day, you're going to get this much as a bonus. And we've all heard the stories about the numbers of grandmothers that would pass away and things that would happen in August, or there's only 2 weeks left, and I just want to go to the beach, and so they would quit, and it'd be two weeks left, and they'd just go to the beach, and except every day they'd come in to visit with their friends at work. It's changed quite a bit over the years because of that college season. Now there's a lot more. Like the J1 workers, the foreign workers. It makes me think of this industry right here. We need workers from all around the world to come here and do the work, of getting the bike ready, delivering bicycles, cleaning up the hotels, feeding the meals. And so we recently started getting more J1 students. For me, when I was running it, I didn't get involved with bringing in J1 students, but I would work with other companies that brought them in and say, look, can your person work a side job with me? Your job is the main job, but I didn't want to get involved with trying to bring them here and house them. And so I had a lot of part-time workers. And, the nationalities have changed over the years. Back in the 80s, there were tons of Irish that were coming here. I think it has a lot to do with the economy in their home country. And then it was Jamaicans are coming here, and now Eastern Europeans are coming here to work. And they come to work. They come to work and make money. And it's not until you get them back for the 3rd or 4th year that they realize, wait, there's more to it than working. So, it's changed a lot over the years.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And Emily, you were telling me that you oversee a whole bevy of instructors who come from across the country, and some of them are international as well. How do you recruit, and where do they live?
So for us, Nantucket Community Sailing is a U.S. Sailing accredited organization, which means that there are standards that U.S. Sailing and national organization sets that we have to meet in terms of our curriculum, our safety, and our programming. So part of U.S. Sailing is level 1 instructor certification and level 2, which our instructors are required to have. So one thing that's amazing about the sailing community is that it's pretty close knit and word travels by mouth pretty quickly. So once kids start teaching sailing, or growing up sailing, and they're sort of exposed to this great summer job, they quickly want to be a part of it. They always see their instructors having a good time and want to be part of it as well. So we recruit from a lot of college sailors from across the country who have raced competitively either in high school or college or both, and are looking to spend their summers still sailing on the water. And then we also have a lot of Irish sailors that come over as well, and really that has been word of mouth. Irish students coming over, telling them what a great time they had working for community sailing and being on Nantucket for a summer, and then spreading that around, which has been very helpful. So one thing that we try and do, Emily Taylor is our program director, and she and I look very similar, and some people are often confused, but we work very closely together. And after COVID, we decided to sort of downsize a little bit. We were working with 40 instructors. We cut it back to about 30 and made our programming a bit more efficient. Emily and I were often stuck in the office all summer, sort of doing management from the computer, but during and after COVID, we made it a priority to be at the sites and on the beach. And one thing that's been great feedback from our instructors is that they appreciate that, and they appreciate the mentorship that we're able to give. So I think it makes them more confident and wanting to come back as well, which is helpful for us. And then in terms of where we house them, we previously had been renting houses, which I know some of our other panelists are doing as well, but that was becoming cost exhibitive for us. So we built a dorm in 2019, right mid-island by the Stop and Shop there, and we're able to house 18 instructors from off-island. And my husband and I live in the apartment that's attached to it, and we manage the dorm. We're like the RA there, so we have some oversight in those after hours. And then circling back a little bit here, a lot of our instructors have grown up in our programs, and we run a volunteer instructor and training program as well. So we're able to train usually 15 to 16-year-olds or 14 to 16-year-olds to be instructors and prepare them to take that level 1 course so that they're certified to be instructors for us in the future.
That's great. It occurs to me as I've been listening to everybody talk that all of your jobs and all of the organizations that you're affiliated with do in some way intersect with the natural landscape of Nantucket. You're out on the water, you're teaching people about how the wind works and how the harbor works if you're sailing in it, and there's definitely things to learn. It's not just a placid pond, where anything can go. There's a local knowledge to that, and I'm sure, Harvey, you're always telling people maybe don't bike directly up Main Street. There are better ways to go. But I wanted to return to Jim, because Jim's really deep knowledge of the history of the golf courses here really intersects with the natural landscape here. And you and I were just talking yesterday about Sankaty and the design there. I'm wondering if you could comment for a minute, because I don't think most people will understand or know the history of getting that course laid out. And you were telling me some great things about the sort of how naturally it lies on the land.
Well, to start with, Nantucket is a product of an ice flow that came down here 25 million years ago and left about 5 million years after that receded, and left this wonderful rolling land, the outwash plains all over the island. And at Sankaty, let me do Nantucket and Nantucket Golf Club. I won't come there and I won't come to the island unless there's a golf course. That was said in April or May. They had a meeting in July that over 100 people showed up, and they were playing golf out by Wannacomet by August of that year. At the same time, the old Nantucket Golf Club, now Sconset or Skinner's, they were probably playing golf there by 1890, 1891, 92. In around 1900, the property was owned by a private owner, but a gentleman by the name of Alex Findlay from Panmure in Scotland came and designed an 18-hole course. The old Nantucket Golf Club became an 18-hole course. After World War II, they were reduced to 9 holes. And that leads us to Sankaty, because what happened in Sconset is that a whole bunch of people from Detroit, from Grosse Pointe and up along Lake St. Clair, came to Nantucket. And I often wondered why, and the best explanation I ever heard is Lake St. Clair is not that deep. And there are flies that come off the lake in the summer, and if the wind's blowing the wrong way, so they all came to Sconset. And the other group that came to Sconset were all the actors, or a bunch of actors from New York City, who didn't act on stage in New York in the summer because none of the theaters were air conditioned. So they came to Sconset, some very well-known actors. And this group of Detroiters and a few more people and all the acting community were constantly at the Sconset Golf Club throughout the summer. They were perhaps far more addicted than even I am. But the fundamental problem was that neither of the two golf courses by after World War I met the standards of what was available on the mainland. All of the great golf courses that we know of, even Los Angeles Country Club, were formed by then. The Country Club in Boston, everything. So there was a movement among a group of wealthy people in Sconset to find another course, to find some land for another course. And so they looked round and about, and one of the gentlemen, George Webster, suggested Mayflower Hill, which is the hill where the Sankaty Clubhouse is situated, but then on either side of it. And the Pulpus Road existed in some way, shape, or form back then too. But all of that land was covered in scrub oak, or at least 80 or 90% of it. And I was looking at that scrub oak today, and it's 10, 12, 15 feet tall. And so these group of Detroiters had built Detroit Golf Club in 1910, 1912. They knew how to do this, but they didn't know whether this piece of land, which looked real good when you got up on high, was appropriate for a golf course. Were there a lot of little ponds around it, little swamps that nobody could see because of the scrub oak? And so they commissioned a gentleman by the name of H. Emerson Armstrong to go out and walk through the property and see if he could find a golf course. And Armstrong left a lot of notes and writings, but one of his comments was that he ruined several pair of shoes, 5 or 6 shirts, some pants, walking through the scrub oak to find out whether there was a golf course there. And he reported back to David Gray and the others that indeed there was. And so the natural inclination of these people who had hired a well-known golf architect in Detroit, was to reach out to a well-known golf architect somewhere. And they identified Walter Travers in New York, and he was probably the best-known golf architect of the time. But there were two problems. One, Travers had a number of other commissions to do first, and two, he would want a topographical map of the property. And David Gray, who was an heir to his father loaned Henry Ford some money and got 10% of the stock so that the Ford Motor Company could keep on going in the early 1900s. And so by 1920, David Gray had cashed out of that stock and had over $36 million. But Gray had the wisdom to realize that Armstrong had developed what we might call a symbiotic relationship with the land. And so they let Armstrong design that golf course. And today, one hole, the 16th hole, has been pushed back maybe 100 yards, but everything else is about the same. Maybe a tee has been moved back 10 or 15 yards, but it was the only course Armstrong ever did, and he nailed it.
I love that. I love that. And so Sheila, I want to come to you because you came here in the Coast Guard and undoubtedly took part in search and rescue and all sorts of the missions that the Coast Guard does. How long do you feel like it took you to sort of understand the harbor and working as harbor master? I'm sure there's lots of people who come into the harbor and think, oh well, whatever, I can just sail over here, and I can just. What are some insights into that?
Yeah, that gets interesting as well every summer. But before I was stationed here, I was in charge of the 8th Navigation Team in Woods Hole, which takes care of all the buoys and lighthouses on the Cape and Islands. So I've been taking care of marking the channels out in Nantucket since 1998. So I had pretty good knowledge of where the shoals were and everything else. But just getting out there every day, you finally get it figured out. And still, it's a struggle. We privately set the aids out in Nantucket, in Pulpus Harbor, which has significant shoaling issues. And it takes us to do Eel Point Channel. It took us about 3 days to find the water to mark it properly, just because over the winter things change. And the same thing in Pulpus. So it takes a while, but I feel like I've been here for a good long time, and I'm pretty confident in where the water is.
Right. Oh, that's great. And Harvey, so people come here and they come into your bicycle shop and they're like, we want to explore the island. And do you find that, well, a couple questions come to mind. One is, is there ever a time when all of your bicycles are out at once? But is there sort of advice that you always give to people, or things that people coming from off island don't realize? I always think of the Main Street example that I gave earlier. But are there other sort of pitfalls that you're always warning people about, or funny situations people are getting into?
Well, I mean, a pretty basic advice is if you're heading out for a ride, and people want to go in a loop. They want to take the loop around the island, and you got to let them know there's not a loop around the island, and they say, well, and I want to go out to Sconset because there's a loop. And I'm like, well, you kind of look like me, and are you going to go 20 miles on a bicycle today? I mean, when was the last time you went 20 miles on a bike? But usually my main advice would be figure out which way the wind is blowing and go against the wind. Because when you start out, you're excited, you got your bike, you're feeling good, you've had your breakfast, you want to get going, and you go against the wind. And when you turn around, hopefully, you got a tailwind coming back. A lot of people don't want that advice. They want to go out to Sconset, and the wind is blowing out of the southwest, and they got a tailwind all the way out the Pulpus Road, and it's awesome. It's the best bike they ever rode. It's a fabulous, it only took them 35 minutes. They have a nice little lunch out there and a glass of wine, and it was so easy. Let's have a second glass of wine. And then, oh, well, it took us 45 minutes to get here. The boat leaves in about an hour, so we better head into town. And you see them on the Milestone Road against the wind all the way back to town. And, that's a tough ride. And it sounds pretty terrible, but so many of them, it's such an accomplishment that they've done that and they made it. And so, that would be my advice. Head out against the wind, and hopefully you get a tailwind for the return ride.
Oh, totally. I live out Hummock Pond Road, and I see that all the time. People biking, well, either to Cisco Beach or more likely the brewery. So those 1 or 2 or 3 beers, then trying to get back into town is all part of that. How many bicycles do you guys have in stock?
If you count all the bikes, the adult bikes, the kids' bikes, the little attachments and all that, we've got over 1,000 bicycles that we rent. And they're not out all the time. We rotate them out. This week, we're bringing them in from the warehouse. Every week, every day, you're bringing 10 more in a truck, 10 more in the truck. And they go out and they go out. It's nice because a lot of people get a bike for a day and bring it back, which is cool. But also people get a bike for 2 or 3 days. So then it's out for 2 or 3 days, and you can bring in more bikes. So 4th of July weekend, we need to have as many bikes as possible ready. And 4th of July weekend is kind of like I call it the preseason playoffs. That's when you have the big tournament in the season. Our season is practice and get ready and learn how to rent bikes. And then 4th of July comes, and that's when you have a tournament. And that's like, you got to be your best, and you've got to do a good job. And then the rest of July is just the regular season, and you're working on the basics, and you're renting bikes. And then August comes, and that's the playoffs. You've got to be ready for August, because you're going to rent, whatever you do on 4th of July weekend, there's a good chance you're going to rent every bike you have. And then July, there's a bit of a lull compared to 4th of July weekend. And then when August hits, it's 4th of July weekend for 3 weeks in a row. And I try to tell the staff, now it's a lot of fun. There's not much happening. And we're going to get busy. July, we're going to really get to hit it. And then there's a lull in July. But in August, you got to be ready, because we're going to be in the playoffs. And we're going to make the top 16. And we're going to go to the finals at Young's.
I love that. And the seasonality, the whole reason we're here is talking about the broad seasonality of the island during the summertime. And I'd love to hear from you, Emily, about sort of what's that rhythm with community sailing? Are there sort of ups and downs, and like, it's obviously exciting to be out there on the water, but is there a seasonality to your work as well?
Yeah, I would say there is. There's, we only have an 8-week program, so it goes by very quickly. And I would say the seasonality is primarily on the instructor's side, where it's that same thing that Harvey's talking about, this excitement, this go time right in the beginning. And then by week 5 and 6, we're a little burnt out. We've burnt the candle at both ends, and we gotta up the momentum again for the final couple of weeks. And so we really try and help our instructors through that, through team building activities, whether it's dinners, staff dinners, or just bringing lunch to the site and that type of thing. But in terms of the seasonality for our participants, we open our program registration in February at noon, and it's mostly sold out by 12:03. So it's a really popular program on the island in terms of sailing for kids. And then we also do rentals and private lessons at Jetty Sailing Center. And we open those in February as well. And a lot of those slots are taken up pretty quickly. But what we try to do is hold some back on the back end. So each week we're opening up new slots. So it's not the same situation for those types of programs, those rentals and private lessons, in order to, facilitate people walking up and saying, you know, this is something that I'm interested in doing on the island. How can you help me? We're a community organization. We don't want to shut people down. So we definitely make sure that people can get out on the water while they're here.
That's good. And you also do a fair amount of outreach through through local organizations. So it's not just kids that you guys do instruction for, but you also have senior programs and others. Because I think people may imagine that, you know, summer people come and they bring their families, and those are the people that are sailing. But that's actually not entirely the case, right? There's a fairly strong local component.
Yeah, there's a huge local component. So we about 40%, 40 to 50% of our programming is island residents. And the way we're able to facilitate that is when we open early for year-round island residents. And so they get sort of first dibs on the classes, and we open about 50% of our slots for that. And we also have a scholarship program for island residents. So we have about $100,000 that's given out in scholarship to island residents. So we make sure that they're a big part of our community. Other outreach that we do is through the Boys and Girls Club. They come down once a week and do water sports, kayaks, paddle boards, and then go out on our Marshall Cat with an instructor. And that's free for them. STAR, which is sports therapeutic recreation, they come down to our jetty sailing center once a week as well and use our kayaks and paddle boards. We recently took over the Sail to Prevail in Nantucket, which is for adaptive sailing. So we offer free adaptive sailing for people with disabilities at jetties. We do senior programming. We have Old Salts, which is a partnership with the Salt Marsh Society, our senior center. And so we provide, our board members have boats in the harbor, and they take people who are 55 and older out for a sail. We've done therapeutic sails with Pascon and Fairwinds. We support Nantucket High School and provide coaching boats and access to our facility for them for their high school program. So there's a lot of outreach that happens.
Wow, that's incredible. I didn't realize it was quite that broad, and I'm really heartened to hear that. I think that's great. So Jim, with the golf courses, so what kind of outreach are the various golf clubs also doing in terms of? I know that some of them have education programs. There's the caddy camp program. You know, what are some of the insights into that?
Since 1930, Sankaty has had a caddy camp. Its first buildings were the old fertilizer shed, or at least part of it, where they served dinners. The camp has evolved, grown, been supported by members, and we now have, give or take, 60 young men who come every summer. They've probably finished 9th grade, and they stay through their first year of college unless they become part of staff. But a lot of them are arriving today. We are the only caddy camp left in the world. The last other camp closed over at Oyster Harbors in 1983. We're unique. Parents don't pay to send their kid to us. I'm on the board there too. The kids apply. Our director reviews the applications. We try to bring kids in from all parts of the country, from all socioeconomic backgrounds. We are supported terrifically by the Evans Scholar Program in Chicago, out of Chicago, which annually has about 1,200 students in college, in 19 different universities across the country, mostly Big Ten schools, but all the way to the University of Washington. 7 or 8 of our kids become Evans Scholars. My experience living in Chicago, where I practiced law, was that if you were an Evans Scholar, you were going to make at least twice as much in life as your classmate in grade school. More importantly, the Evans Scholar program raises about $40 million a year in donations, and more than half of that comes from former Evans Scholars. Nantucket Golf Club learned after a few years that they needed to integrate themselves better into the island, and so Nantucket Children's Charities was formed, and that they do a one-day golf fundraiser in early August. They raise a great amount of money, but that money is given back to children's programs on the island. 2 students every year win a full 4-year full tuition scholarship to any university of their choice. There are trade school scholarships. That's giving back to the island. Out at Maya Comet, I'll make a plug for them too, the new 18-hole course. The Maya Comet first became a 9-hole course in 1963. It evolved into an 18-hole course around 2000. It's a course that someone who can't break 100 can play and enjoy. And as we found out from the U.S. Senior Amateur here a couple of years ago, it challenged the best amateur players in the country. So that there is, they have their programs out there. So, golf is a wonderful sport. It was curious that both Massachusetts and Ireland didn't think golf was COVID safe, but if you've ever played in a foursome, that is social distancing in action. I mean, what were they thinking? And it's so, and it's I'll tell you an anecdote about myself. I went and saw my internist a couple months ago, and he said, wait a minute, you're playing 300 rounds a year, you're shooting your age, so what that says is you approach a shot, you look at it, you might measure it, you tell your body what to do, and it apparently does it. You shouldn't worry about Alzheimer's for a while. And so that was comforting.
I love that. That's great. So we are coming closer to the end of our time. I do want to open up for questions in just a moment, but before we do, I would love to just come down the line here and ask each of you to name your favorite aspect of summer through the lens of what you're doing. And if that's different from your favorite aspect of summer in general, I'd love to hear that too. We'll start with Jim.
Well, golf is part of my existence, so let's put that aside. What I really love about this island is the opportunity to be in the building behind us here at White Heron Theater and see a play like The Weir a few years ago, Dial M for Murder last summer, where you're captured by the actors. You enter a world of your imagination, and you just sit there for a couple of hours. It's like sitting on a beach. You're there in your own little self, apart from everything else that bothers and bugs you, and you're seemingly at peace with yourself. That's neat.
Very good. Sheila?
My favorite part is taking my boat out after work and just enjoying how beautiful the island is. I mean, it's beautiful, but especially from the water, it's the most beautiful place ever. I love doing that.
Thank you. I love that. Harvey?
Someone asked me at work one day, they said, oh, you must love bicycles. and bicycling. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't wear the tight pants. I don't have the mirror on my helmet. I don't race around, and I don't go on biking trips. I said, what I really love is doing hospitality in Nantucket with bicycles. I grew up doing hospitality. I grew up sharing my home with people that were curious about what's here, what's special about it, and I could share that with them. And not only could I, like in our business, we get them first. And then they have their bike, and then they turn it in, and we get them last. And you can see the joy and the experience that people have had here. So I've loved doing hospitality in Nantucket.
That's a great lens to look at it through.
As Jim mentioned, golf is the essence of his life. I would say sailing in the saltwater is the essence of mine. So being in Vermont and being in the mountains all year round, it's such a joy to come and be on Nantucket and on the saltwater and around boats. It's such a fast-paced summer, and the joys of it come from working with and mentoring these awesome instructors that we have, being at our sites and seeing the kids and the adults come off the water with smiles on their faces every day. And one thing that Emily Taylor, our program director, and I haven't given up is being able to be a part of the teaching experience as well here too. So together we run our Tiny Salts program. So we have Tiny Salts, which are 2 and 3 year olds, all the way up to Old Salts. So we run Tiny Salts, and then we also run a women's clinic, both on Tuesdays. So we get to be part of the teaching experience on the island as well, and that's what my favorite part is.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. We are going to open up for questions if there are any. We do have some microphones, so if you have a question, please wait for the microphone to come around so that we can capture that for the recording. Is there anybody who would like to pose a challenging follow-up for any of us? Oh, we do need the microphones for the recording, I'm sorry to say.
I'm just interested to know, does the caddy camp have only boys?
We have, well, we've been all boys since 1930. And managing a group of 60, 65 boys who live in relatively close quarters is a challenge in and of itself. To add young women to our program, might double our capital budget, would certainly cause us to increase our staff greatly. I've played a lot of golf in Chicago, where the Evans Scholar program has both young men and young women caddying, winning scholarships, and that's great. But, you know, the Boy Scouts, you know, are allowed to be Boy Scouts, and the Girl Scouts are allowed to be Girl Scouts. It's a challenge that, you know, in a perfect world, it would be great, but it would be really too high a hill to climb for us. And, you know, I wish we could, but it's financially, physically, emotionally, it's just not possible.
So Jim, in part, this is a housing issue?
Well, we have 3 huts that have 18 bunk beds and 1 single bed in them. And we have about, you know, give or take 35 to 40 square feet per young person in those huts. And, you know, it's close quarters.
Thank you. That was a very good question. Anyone else? Oh, we've got a couple people over here. Who has the microphone? Oh, you have the microphone already.
A question for Harvey. One of the documents that I think I love the most on Nantucket is your map, and sort of how the maps have evolved over the years and what it represents and what, you know, you talked about hospitality, but also the history of the island. You get at a lot of things on that document and on that map. I'm just curious how that's changed, and in this digital age, the fact that you're still giving out the hard copy map, which I love, wonder what the thought and thinking is behind that.
Thank you. That's a great question. That map is an awesome part of what we do at Young's Bicycle Shop. I recently, I think a year or so ago, donated over 20 different maps to the NHA, starting with the first map for Young's Bicycle Shop that was designed by Tony Sarg. When I took over Young's Bicycle Shop in the 90s, we had a pretty basic map that was done with what they called 3-color printing, or maybe it was 4-color printing, and we had 4 colors. Well, it turns out with 4-color printing, you can have every color in the world, depending on how it's done. And when I had to make some changes and add a street back in those days, I got to go over to New Bedford and meet the guy that would cut and paste the little street and put it in there so they could print the next one out. A few years after that, a fellow by the name of Fred Schwartz, who did a lot of work here in Nantucket, made a digital map for us, which was awesome. And so there's a couple of things. The Young's map, someday I would love to do a story here of the history of Nantucket through the Young's map. There are enough of them to do that. One of my favorite things about the Young's map, well, 2 of them I'll say. The Young's map is made to stand in front of Young's Bicycle Shop and hold it up and give directions. When you're looking at the Young's map in front of Young's Bicycle Shop, it's lined up so the wharf is down there, and that's the way you're going. And when you flip it over to the other side, the island is lined up so that Brant points over there and Nantucket's out in that direction. And that's a pretty cool thing about the Young's map. So no place on it does it say you are here, because you could be using it anywhere on the island. One other short thing about the Young's map is that when we did go digital, I found one of the old Tony Sarg maps, and we scanned. There were little bicycles all over the map. And on the first map, there were little bicycles with little sketches of people riding their little bicycle, the lady's hair blowing in the wind. One is a little tandem. And underneath every one, it said HAYs. It just says HAYs under every bike. And that was Harvey A. Young's bicycle shop, and his bicycles were all over the island. So when we went digital, I cut out those little bikes. I left out the HAYs because it's not Harvey A. Young's bicycle shop anymore. And we added those little bikes. And if you look at our map now, that's a digital version. Those little Tony Sarg drawings of little bikes are still on the map.
And in case anybody doesn't know, we are going to have a show about Tony, an exhibit about Tony Sarg next summer. So please come back. I think we had one more question here.
I think it's very cool that you guys are 2 by sea and 2 by land to represent the experience of Nantucket. And of course, I'm thinking of that as parallel to the days before we converted to a tourism economy, and we were, the whalers and we were the farmers. And we've always had to be very connected to the land and the sea, living here on this small island. I'm also really interested to hear so many reference that the experience, especially Harvey Young, that you went far afield and that you met a lot of people on Nantucket who were worldly and international, and that informed you for your travels when you were a young man, and then you came back here with all of your travels. And I always think of Nantucket and the people of Nantucket as often doing that, whether it was in the whaling days or just because we are exposed to so many people from all over the world. But my question is, the exhibit here at the McCausland Gallery, one of the intriguing things is it shows that we have all felt that Nantucket isn't the same Nantucket anymore as we recall when we were young, no matter how old we are. And we can see that people were thinking that back in the 20s too, 1920s. And I'm wondering, from your unique perspectives, if you are indeed seeing changes now that really do feel like they are fundamental changes, or if you feel that the changes people refer to are a kind of part of the ebb and flow of Nantucket.
What a great question. Who wants to tackle that one?
Well,
Harvey first and then-
I'll start. Yeah, I've seen some changes in my day, and my wife gets tired of me saying it ain't like it used to be. And I think there are going to be times in the future where many people are going to say, "Oh, remember back in 23, how awesome it was." Oh, in 23, you could go sailing, you could go golfing, you could go out on the boat and feel safe, you could go swimming, and oh, it's not like it used to be back in the 20s. And in the, you know people that came here in 1990 and it turned to 2000 and are like, oh, it's not like it used to be in 1990. And you heard my story earlier. I left in 78 because it had really been ruined. In my life, it was ruined. Oh no, it's ruined. So right now is an awesome time in Nantucket. And 10 years from now, it ain't going to be like it used to be.
A couple thoughts. When I play Sanctity, I play a course that Emerson Armstrong designed in 1921. And it really hasn't changed. I'm playing the shots that he hoped I would play. When I go to the theater, I step back in time. Blythe Spirit is probably Noel Coward's best comedy. But I also jokingly, and maybe not so jokingly, tell the story of a young couple who have made their fortune someplace else and buy their 8-figure dream home on Nantucket. And suddenly, on a Friday, about this time, they notice a leak in the basement. Well, one of the things they did not learn in school was that there is such a thing as a shutoff valve. They don't know what it is, where to find it, how to turn it. And when they call their plumber, unless it's Bobby Butler, their plumber is in Barnstable, and he'll be back on Monday. And they don't know where the shutoff valve is or how to turn it. My fear for Nantucket in the future is that there will be other circumstances like that where tradespeople, great tradespeople, master plumbers, master electricians, can't afford to live on this island. If I'm waiting for a friend at the boat at 8 o'clock on a weekday morning, unless I'm standing off to the side, I get trampled with all the workmen. We've got to solve that problem. That's my fear about the future. There's erosion and there's everything else, but Nantucket has to be self-sufficient and not wait for the boat on Monday morning.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything to that, either of you?
So in my personal experience growing up sailing competitively, it was extremely disorganized. And I think back on those times with a bit of nostalgia about how my skipper and I would just get our boat and tow it ourselves to a regatta, and sometimes we'd have housing and sometimes we wouldn't, and we just sort of figured it out on the fly. But now we have an all-island race team that's collaborative with ourselves, Nantucket Yacht Club and Great Harbor Yacht Club, which is extremely organized, and there's a lot of logistics involved. And kids go out and, with 4 or 5 coaches, there's 15 to 20 of them traveling together and staying in hotels off island. And part of me always felt, in the past few years as this has become more developed, that they're missing out on something, that there's something, about the adventure of not really knowing what was going to happen that they're not getting anymore. But then I thought about it a little bit more, and it's less about, it doesn't always have to be about figuring things out on the fly to have a memorable experience. It's about the memories that they're making and the connections that they're making. And part of the sailing community is that you make these connections with people off island as you're growing up, and then you sail against them in college, and then maybe you're working with them in another organization later on down the road. So it's more about those connections and those memories that you make through those team building experiences than it is about how things were real loosey-goosey and now they're quite organized.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking that. Well, we've run to the end of our time, but I want to say thank you to all of you for attending tonight, and I really want to extend my profound gratitude to our 4 panelists for spending time with us tonight and sharing from your experiences. Can we have a round of applause?